The bullet tore through my wedding dress as Blake Evans, the man I'd pledged to spend forever with, pulled the trigger. His eyes, cold, unfeeling, were the last thing I saw before darkness claimed me. All because he believed the venomous lies Victoria had whispered in his ear. I died on my wedding day, but death wasn't my end. I awakened 3 years in the past, with memories of a future that never should have been. This time, I wouldn't be naive. I'd build my empire brick by brick, watching as Blake inevitably crossed my path again. I let him fall for me, harder, deeper than before, becoming his obsession. And just when he couldn't imagine life without me, I'd show him exactly what it feels like to lose everything in an instant. He thought killing me was the finale of our story, but he was wrong. It was merely the prologue to his downfall. I still remember the sound of the gunshot echoing through the chapel, the gasp from the wedding guests, and the searing pain as the bullet pierced my heart. The pristine white of my wedding dress bloomed crimson as I collapsed onto the aisle. Blake stood over me, gun in hand, his eyes dark with rage and betrayal. "You've been lying to me all along, Sophia," he hissed, Victoria smirking behind him. "This is what happens to manipulative liars." Those were the last words I heard before everything went black. I expected nothingness, the void of death. Instead, I woke up gasping in my old apartment 3 years before I was supposed to meet Blake Evans. My phone buzzed with notifications. The date on the screen made me freeze. April 17th, 2020. 3 years before my wedding day. Before my murder. I stumbled to the bathroom, my fingers trembling as they traced the unblemished skin where the bullet had torn through. No wound, no blood. Just smooth skin and the thundering of my heartbeat. I wasn't dead. I'd been given a second chance. The first few days after my rebirth, I was in shock. I moved through my life like a ghost, overwhelmed by memories of events that hadn't happened yet. My best friend, Mia, was alive. In my previous life, she died in a car accident a year before my wedding. My career was still in its infancy. I hadn't yet made partner at the law firm. And Blake Evans was still a stranger, someone I wouldn't bump into at a coffee shop for another 6 months. My sister Victoria was still in my life, playing the role of the supportive sibling. But now I could see through her mask of sisterly affection. The subtle jabs hidden in compliments, the calculated way she positioned herself as the victim, the gleam of jealousy in her eyes whenever I achieved something she hadn't. Victoria had always been envious of me, but I hadn't realised the depths of her hatred until she whispered lies into Blake's ear the night before our wedding. Lies about infidelity, about using him for his money and connections, about plotting against him with his business rivals. Lies that drove him to retrieve the gun he kept in his car and put a bullet through my heart as I walked down the aisle. This time would be different. This time I knew what was coming. I started by rebuilding my life from the ground up. I quit my job at the law firm. There was no future there, just 80-hour work weeks and a glass ceiling I'd never break through. Instead, I used my savings to invest in stocks I knew would soar within the next year. Tesla, Bitcoin, Amazon. I had knowledge of the future, and I wasn't afraid to use it. Within 6 months, I'd multiplied my initial investment tenfold. I used the money to start my own consulting firm, specialising in tech startups. By the time I was supposed to meet Blake at that coffee shop, I was already on my way to becoming one of the most successful young entrepreneurs in the city. And when that fateful day in October arrived, I made sure I wasn't anywhere near that coffee shop. Instead, I was closing a deal with one of Blake's biggest competitors, laying the groundwork for my revenge. You see, Blake Evans was the golden boy of the tech industry, a self-made billionaire with a touch of arrogance that made women swoon and men want to be him. In my previous life, I'd fallen for his charm like everyone else. This time, I knew the monster behind the smile. I spent the next year building my reputation and my company. I made strategic connections, positioning myself as someone Blake would inevitably want to work with. And when Victoria came crawling back into my life, asking for money and connections, I welcomed her with open arms and a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I'm so proud of you, Sophia," she said, her voice dripping with forced sweetness. "You've come so far in such a short time." I smiled, seeing through her mask of admiration to the envy beneath. "I'm just getting started, Vicky, and I want you by my side for all of it. Keep your friends close and your sisters who will betray you and get you killed closer." The first time Blake and I met in this new timeline wasn't by chance. I engineered a meeting at a charity gala I knew he would attend. I wore a blood-red dress that night, a silent promise of what was to come. Blake noticed me immediately. Our eyes locked across the room, and I felt a chill run down my spine as I remembered those same eyes watching the life drain from my body. But I plastered on a smile and played my part perfectly. "Sophia Winters," I introduced myself, extending my hand. "I believe you've been working with Trans Tech. I just acquired them last month." His eyebrows shot up, clearly not expecting this information. In my previous life, I'd been impressed by his accomplishments. This time, I made sure he was the one impressed. "Blake Evans," he replied, his grip firm as he shook my hand. "I wasn't aware Trans Tech was on the market." "They weren't," I said with a smile that held secrets. "But everyone has a price, don't they, Mr. Evans?" That night was the beginning of a dangerous dance. Blake was intrigued by me, the woman who seemed to anticipate his moves before he made them, who wasn't dazzled by his wealth or reputation. I knew exactly what buttons to push, what words would keep him thinking about me long after our conversations ended. For months, I kept him at arm's length, professional but distant. I'd smile, engage in witty banter, then walk away just as his interest peaked. I was rewriting our story, making sure that this time he would be the one desperate for my attention, not the other way around. All the while, Victoria watched with growing unease. In my previous life, she'd been the one to introduce us, positioning herself as the bridge between her successful future brother-in-law and her struggling sister. Now, she was on the outside looking in, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind as she tried to figure out how to insert herself into the narrative. 6 months after our first meeting, Blake finally asked me out. We were at a tech conference in San Francisco, both of us panelists discussing the future of AI. "You're not what I expected, Sophia Winters," he said as we shared a drink at the hotel bar afterward. "Is that a compliment or a criticism, Mr. Evans?" I asked, sipping my martini. "Definitely a compliment. You're different. In an industry full of people trying to impress me, you seem completely uninterested in my approval." I smiled, knowing he was falling right into the trap I'd set. "That's because I don't need your approval, Blake. I'm doing just fine on my own." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Have dinner with me tomorrow night. Not as colleagues, not as competitors. Just dinner." I pretended to consider it, though I'd planned for this moment for months. "I suppose I could rearrange my schedule," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. That dinner was the first of many. I let Blake believe he was pursuing me, that he was breaking down my walls. In reality, I was carefully constructing a facade that he couldn't resist, a version of myself that was tailored to appeal to his every desire. I made sure our relationship developed in the public eye. Social media posts, appearances at high-profile events, interviews where we were mentioned as the power couple of the tech world. I wanted everyone to witness his fall when it came. Victoria grew increasingly desperate as she watched Blake become infatuated with me. She tried to insinuate herself into our relationship, showing up uninvited to dinners, calling Blake on the pretense of business queries, even attempting to undermine me in subtle ways during conversations. "You know, Sophia was never really interested in tech before," she said during one dinner, her smile sharp as a knife. "It's fascinating how quickly she's adapted to your world, Blake." Blake just laughed. "Your sister is a natural. Sometimes I think she understands this industry better than people who've been in it for decades. I saw the flash of hatred in Victoria's eyes, quickly masked by a forced laugh. That's my sister, always the quick study. As my relationship with Blake deepened, I made sure to keep records of everything. Every conversation, every message, every business dealing. I installed hidden cameras in my apartment and office, documenting every interaction we had. Because I knew what was coming, or rather, what would have come if I hadn't changed the timeline. A year into our relationship, Blake proposed. Not at a restaurant or scenic overlook like in my previous life, but at the opening of a new wing of a children's hospital that my foundation had funded. It was public, it was grand, and it was captured by dozens of cameras. As he slipped the ring on my finger, a different ring from my previous life, larger and more ostentatious, I looked into his eyes and saw no trace of the man who would murder me on our wedding day. But I knew better now. The capacity for that violence was there, dormant beneath the surface, waiting for Victoria's poisonous words to awaken it. Yes, I said, tears in my eyes that he mistook for joy, rather than the cold calculation they actually were. The crowd cheered, cameras flashed, and Victoria, standing off to the side, looked like she might shatter from the force of her suppressed rage. The engagement made headlines. Tech titans to tie the knot, the articles proclaimed. Power couple Blake Evans and Sophia Winters engaged. Our wedding was set for June 15th, 2023, the same date as in my previous life, a detail I insisted on for poetic justice. The planning was elaborate, with no expense spared. Blake wanted a spectacle, and I was happy to oblige, knowing what the actual spectacle would be. 3 months before the wedding, I made my first calculated move. I approached Victoria with an opportunity. I want you to be my maid of honour, I told her over lunch, watching as surprise and suspicion fought for dominance on her face. Really? I thought you might ask Mia, she said, referring to my best friend, who, in this timeline, was still very much alive thanks to a warning call I'd made on the day she was supposed to have her accident. You're my sister, Vicky. Despite our complicated relationship, I want you by my side on the most important day of my life. She accepted, of course. Victoria could never resist being at the centre of attention, even if it was technically my day, and being maid of honour gave her access to the planning, to Blake, to opportunities to sow seeds of doubt, which is exactly what I wanted. As the wedding approached, I began to plant evidence. Fabricated emails, doctored photos, edited voice recordings that suggested I was exactly what Victoria had accused me of being in my previous life. Manipulative, unfaithful, using Blake for his connections. I made sure these breadcrumbs were just hidden enough that Victoria would find them and believe she'd discovered them on her own. And find them she did. 2 weeks before the wedding, I accidentally left my laptop open in our family home while visiting our parents. The screen displayed emails between me and one of Blake's business rivals, discussing how I planned to leverage insider information after the wedding. Victoria took the bait, her eyes widening as she secretly read the messages. I pretended not to notice, excusing myself to help our mother in the kitchen. When I returned, my laptop was exactly as I'd left it, but Victoria had a gleam in her eye that I recognised all too well. The night before our wedding, I made sure Blake would be alone at his penthouse, susceptible to a late-night visitor bearing concerning news. Victoria didn't disappoint. At 11:23 p.m, I knew the exact time because I'd bugged Blake's penthouse. Months ago, the security system announced her arrival. I listened from my hotel suite as she unravelled the web of lies I'd carefully constructed, presenting Blake with evidence of my betrayal. I didn't want to believe it myself, Blake. Victoria's voice wavered with fake emotion. But Sophia isn't who you think she is. She's been playing you from the start. I heard the confusion and anger in Blake's voice as he demanded proof, as Victoria showed him the fabricated emails, the doctored photos, the edited recordings I'd made sure she found. "I'm only telling you this because I care about you, Blake," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false concern. "You deserve better than someone who's using you, someone who's loyal, who's always had your best interests at heart." I smiled as I heard the implication in her words. Victoria had always wanted Blake for herself. In my previous life, she'd been content to destroy what I had with him. But this time, she wanted to take my place. I listened as Blake's voice grew harder, colder, transforming into the voice of the man who had murdered me. "She'll pay for this," he said, and I heard the clink of a glass as he poured himself another drink. "No one makes a fool of Blake Evans." Victoria's voice was soothing, manipulative. "What are you going to do?" There was a long pause, and when Blake spoke again, his voice sent a chill down my spine despite knowing this was all part of my plan. "I keep a gun in my car," he said quietly. "For protection." Victoria's sharp intake of breath was audible even through the bug. "Blake, Don't worry, Vicky. I'm not going to do anything stupid. I need to confront her, make her admit what she's done before everyone we know." I could almost see Victoria nodding, a mix of excitement and trepidation on her face. In my previous life, she'd never expected Blake to actually kill me. She just wanted to hurt me, to ruin my happiness. She'd been as shocked as everyone else when he pulled the trigger. But this Blake, in this timeline, was even more unstable than the one I'd known. I'd made sure of it, subtly pushing him over months with small betrayals, manufacturing business setbacks that he blamed on others, isolating him from friends who might have been voices of reason. The day of our wedding dawned bright and clear, just as it had in my previous life. I got ready with a calm that surprised even me, knowing what was coming. My wedding dress was the same, a custom designer gown with a sweetheart neckline and a cathedral train. But underneath it, I wore a lightweight bulletproof vest, carefully tailored to be invisible beneath the layers of satin and lace. Victoria was tense as she helped me get ready, her smile strained, her eyes constantly darting to the clock. "Are you okay, Vicky?" I asked innocently. "Just wedding day jitters, I guess," she replied, not meeting my eyes. "Are you sure you want to go through with this, Sophia? There's still time to back out if you're having doubts." I smiled, touching her cheek in a gesture of sisterly affection that made her flinch. Why would I have doubts about marrying the man of my dreams? The ceremony was set for 3 p.m. in a beautiful old chapel with stained glass windows that cast colourful patterns across the aisle I would walk down. Guests began arriving at 2, filling the pews with the who's who of the tech industry and high society. At 2:45, I received the signal I'd been waiting for, a text from the private security team I'd hired months ago, informing me that Blake had arrived and was, as predicted, visibly agitated and had retrieved something from his car before entering the chapel. It was time for the final act. As the wedding march began to play, I took a deep breath and stepped into the doorway of the chapel. The guests rose, turning to look at me with smiles and some with tears of joy. At the end of the aisle stood Blake, handsome in his tuxedo, but with a coldness in his eyes that only I could recognize. Victoria stood off to the side with the other bridesmaids, her face a mask of false happiness that couldn't hide the anticipation in her eyes. I began my walk down the aisle, my father at my side, my steps measured and confident. I was counting them, 20 steps to reach the point where, in my previous life, Blake had pulled the gun and fired. 10 steps, 15, 20. And there it was, the movement I'd been expecting. Blake's hand reaching inside his jacket, his face contorting with rage. "You lying, manipulative bitch," he snarled, pulling out the gun as gasps erupted from the guests. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" My father tried to step in front of me, but I gently pushed him aside, facing Blake head-on. Find out what, Blake? I asked calmly, even as the gun pointed directly at my heart. Everything, he shouted, his hand shaking. The emails, the meetings with my competitors, all of it. Victoria showed me everything. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Victoria's face had gone pale, realizing perhaps that this was escalating beyond what she had expected. Did she now? I said, taking a step toward him despite the gun. And did you ever consider verifying that information? Did you ever think to ask me? Confusion flickered across his face, but the rage quickly reasserted itself. The evidence was clear, Sophia. You've been using me from the start. I smiled, a cold, knowing smile that made him hesitate. Blake Evans, you are proving to be exactly the man I suspected you were. Weak, gullible, and willing to believe the worst without question. His finger tightened on the trigger. Don't try to talk your way out of this. I'm not talking my way out of anything, I said, my voice carrying through the now silent chapel. I'm giving you exactly what you deserve. And then, with perfect timing, the doors at the back of the chapel burst open, and a team of police officers streamed in, weapons drawn. Blake Evans, put down the weapon, the lead officer commanded. Blake's eyes widened in shock, darting between me and the officers. What? Did you think I wouldn't be prepared? I asked quietly for his ears only. I've known what you were capable of for a very long time, Blake. I just needed everyone else to see it too. With the police closing in, Blake made the decision I knew he would. The same decision that had ended my life in another timeline. He fired. The impact knocked me back a step, but the bulletproof vest did its job. As I steadied myself, still very much alive, Blake's face transformed into a mask of pure shock. The police tackled him to the ground, the gun skittering across the marble floor. As they handcuffed him, I walked forward, unzipping the side of my wedding dress to reveal the bulletproof vest beneath, with the bullet embedded right over my heart. You just tried to murder your bride in front of 300 witnesses, Blake, I said, my voice steady despite the pain blooming in my chest. And the governor, 2 senators, and the CEO of every major tech company in the country. Not to mention the live stream that's been broadcasting this ceremony to another 1,000 people online. His face crumpled as the reality of his situation sank in. Sophia, Save it, I cut him off. Everything was recorded, including your conversation with Victoria last night, where you discussed shooting me. Did I mention I bugged your penthouse months ago? I have everything, Blake. Every word, every threat. As the police pulled Blake to his feet, I turned to find Victoria trying to slip out a side door. 2 more officers intercepted her, one of them reading her rights as they handcuffed her as an accessory. You set us up, Blake said, his voice hollow with disbelief. All of this was a setup. I stepped close to him, close enough to whisper in his ear. You have no idea how long I've been planning this. In another life, you succeeded in killing me. But fate gave me a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. Confusion clouded his eyes at my cryptic words, but he had no time to question them as the police led him away, cameras flashing as reporters who had come to cover a high society wedding instead documented the dramatic arrest of a tech billionaire for attempted murder. The aftermath was everything I had planned for. Blake's arrest made international headlines. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The recorded conversation with Victoria, the live stream of the attempted murder, the testimony of hundreds of witnesses. His empire crumbled within days. Shares in his companies plummeted as investors fled. Business partners cut ties. The golden boy of tech became a pariah overnight. Victoria faced charges as an accessory, her tearful pleas that she never meant for anyone to get hurt falling on deaf ears in the face of the recorded evidence. Our parents could barely look at her, horrified by what their younger daughter had done. As for me, I emerged as a figure of public sympathy and admiration. The brave woman who had suspected her fiancé's violent tendencies and taken steps to protect herself. The savvy businesswoman who hadn't let love blind her to red flags. The survivor who faced down a gunman with unflinching courage. My consulting firm's value tripled in the weeks following the incident. Offers for book deals and movie rights flooded in. I was invited to speak at conferences on domestic violence prevention and women's empowerment. 6 months after what the media dubbed the wedding day shooting, I sat in the courtroom as the jury delivered their verdict. Guilty on all counts for both Blake and Victoria. As the judge sentenced Blake to 20 years for attempted murder, our eyes met across the courtroom. I saw no remorse there, only a cold hatred that confirmed I had been right about him all along. Victoria received 5 years for her role as an accessory. As they led her away, she looked back at me, tears streaming down her face. "Why, Sophia?" she called out. "I'm your sister. How could you do this to me?" I didn't answer, simply watching as they took her away to begin her sentence. Some questions didn't deserve answers, and some betrayals couldn't be forgiven, even with the gift of a second chance. A year after the shooting, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse overlooking the city, a glass of champagne in my hand. My company had just acquired what remained of Blake's once mighty tech empire, purchased for pennies on the dollar after his conviction caused its value to plummet. Mia joined me, clinking her glass against mine. "To justice," she said, "and to second chances." She had no idea how true those words were, how literally I had been given a second chance at life. I smiled, looking out at the city lights. "To second chances," I echoed. In my previous life, I had been naive, trusting, blind to the darkness in those closest to me. Death had opened my eyes, and rebirth had given me the opportunity to rewrite my story, not as the victim, but as the architect of my own justice. Blake had thought killing me would be the end of our story. He never imagined it would be just the beginning of his downfall, orchestrated by a woman who had already died once at his hands and had nothing left to fear. They say living well is the best revenge. But I disagree. The best revenge is making sure those who hurt you lose everything they value, just as they once took everything from you, and standing tall to watch as they fall. In this new life, that's exactly what I did.